Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Veil. Today we hear from Dr. Tony Sikora, an orthopedic surgeon whose life took an unimaginable turn when he was struck by lightning. What followed was not just a brush with death, but a profound journey beyond the physical world, one that would awaken a mysterious and unstoppable passion for music. Hi, my name is Tony Sikora. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and I've had an interesting experience in my life. In 1994, I was 42 years old, and I was at a communal birthday party for my wife's family. Because there were 5 or 6 people that had birthdays, and it was easy to have one party to get everybody. On that particular day, we were in a place called Athens, New York, and we were at a lake called Sleepy Hollow Lake. At any rate, I was assigned the duty of running the grill, and I was outside doing that. It was a beautiful summer day. As the day wore on, my mom was not there, and so I decided I would go call for her on the phone just to check on her. And I was not paying attention to the fact that the sky had grown dark and a big cloud had formed over the lake. But I was busy, so I was oblivious to it. And I walked around the front of the building, and we had rented a pavilion, and the front of the building was a payphone. So I walked around to the front of the building, and I picked up the phone, and I dialed my mom, and she was busy and didn't answer the phone. After it rang 5 or 6 times, I decided, well, I'll just hang up and try again later. And as I started to take the phone away from my face, I heard a huge crack, and this big flash of light came out of the phone and hit me in the face. I knew exactly what had happened. There had been a storm that had come down and hit the building and came out through the phone and hit me in the face and just threw me back like a rag doll. As I was flying backwards from the impact, I had a very strange sensation of moving forward. And I was very confused because I thought, that's really a strange thing to happen. And then I was standing there, and I'm looking around, and I looked to the front, and there's the phone dangling. And I looked to my right, and there's a staircase going up to the second floor. And it just cannot comprehend what is going on. There was no lapse of any thought or memory. And right at that second, I hear my mother-in-law screaming at the top of the stairs, and she comes flying down the stairs, and she's running right at me. And I'm thinking, this can't be good. It was like she didn't see where I was. I'm standing right in front of her, and she comes running down the stairs, and she doesn't acknowledge that I'm standing there, and she just takes off to her left. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to follow her. So I turned and I started walking toward where she was going, and I was confronted with myself. I was totally shocked, and I see my body is on the ground, and there's all these people that are standing around it, and I'm walking over toward the body, and I realize, oh my God, I'm dead. And I thought, I was kind of disappointed because I thought, oh, it must be some sort of thing that would happen when you die, that, bells go off or whistles or something. But there was nothing. It was just 1 second I was standing there in front of the phone, and the next I was flying backwards, and then I had that strange sensation of moving forwards, which I'm assuming was me leaving my body. And now I'm confronted with the fact that the shell is on the ground, but my consciousness is with me. That's a critical thing to realize, because as I was standing there, I'm having these racing thoughts, and I realize that, oh my God, I'm the consciousness of that empty shell on the ground. And I realize that whoever I am, I always am. There's no break in consciousness. There's no such thing as dying. Yeah, we die, but we don't cease. We continue, and the consciousness continues on. And so as I'm standing there, I'm watching, I'm trying to call out to them, but nobody can hear me or see me. And I thought, well, this is pretty strange. And there was a lady standing behind me waiting to use the phone. So she was probably 5 yards behind me. And
she and her daughter were standing there. Her daughter was 12, 13 years old, and she was waiting to use the phone because she wanted to call one of her friends. Her mom was sitting there with her. Turns out her mom was a nurse, and I saw her starting to get down to do CPR. And at that point, I thought, well, nobody can hear me, nobody can see me, and I feel stupid just standing here. So for some reason, I turned and started to go up to the second floor because I wanted to see my family. And as I started walking up the stairs, it was very strange because I normally will look down at the ground to see where the stairs are so I don't trip and fall on my face. And as I got to about the third step, I noticed that something was happening to my legs. The form was starting to dissolve. And I thought, whoa, this is really getting out of hand here. And I continued walking up the stairs, and by the time I got up to the top of the stairs, I had no form at all. And I was just a ball of energy. And at that point, the stairs go off to the left, and I didn't bother. I just went right through the wall. And I came out on the other side of the wall, directly over my wife's head. And she was sitting on a chair, and she was painting children's faces. Because there were a bunch of kids there, and they were all little. And I looked down at her and I looked at my kids and I just got the intuition that they would be fine. And I just kept going. And it was like I was on a conveyor belt that I had no control over. And so I passed diagonally through the room. And when I went through the roof was when things really started to get interesting because it was like I had immediately fallen into a river of pure positive energy. And it was this bright bluish white light that just pervaded from what seemed like a source that was some distance away, but it just radiated into everything. And it reminded me of when I was a child, I would swim in a creek that had a deep area and this crystal clear water, and I would lay down on the bottom and look up at the sun, and the sun would come through the water, and the rays would have this sparkly kind of appearance to it. And it reminded me of that. But what was so striking about this light was that if you can imagine absolute love and peace, that was what was the only thing that was in this energy. And I call it an energy because I could not only see the energy coming, but I could feel it and I could actually see the energy form, which was really strange because I'm looking at it and I could see that energy was what made everything. I was looking at trees and hillside and could see the lines of energy, and it was almost like a sine wave that was a low frequency vibration that was running through everything. And I thought, well, this must be the God energy. This must be what makes everything. And it was stunningly nothing but love and peace, and I don't think I could describe it any other way. And I thought this is the greatest thing that could ever happen to somebody to experience this. And as I was floating in this river of pure positive energy, I had a kind of a flashback of previous high and low points in my life. It was almost like a collage. It wasn't anything in detail. It was just flashes of a picture of this, a picture of that, and there was just a certain knowing that came with the pictures, similar to what you would see now. You look at a picture and, a thousand words come with it. And so I'd become ecstatic about where I was going because this was really an amazing trip. And I knew that I was going someplace because it had speed and direction. It was taking me someplace. I had no idea where I was going, but at that point I didn't care either. I was just so overwhelmed with how wonderful it was. It reached the point where I was just absolutely ecstatic with where I was going and what was happening. And then it was like somebody flipped the switch, and suddenly I was back in my body. And I remember screaming out, to myself because I was still unconscious, please don't make me do this. I don't want to go back. And I was really angry because, number one, it hurt like hell. I went from absolute bliss to nothing but pain, where this thing had hit me in the face, left a burn on my mouth, and a burn on my foot where it went out, and those things really hurt. And it seemed like it took, many minutes before I was able to open my eyes and to even regain consciousness. And when I did, I looked and there was this nurse lady who was kneeling next to me. I wanted to thank her for saving my life, but all that came out was, "It's okay, I'm a doctor." And she just kind of laughed and said, "Well, you were a minute ago." And I felt so stupid for having said that. I said, "Okay, the circuits aren't working too well, so I'm just going to shut up." And at that point, the police came and they wanted to take me in an ambulance, and I said, "No way, I'm not going to sit in the hospital for hours just to have somebody tell me, yeah, you get struck by lightning and you're alive." So then I wasn't thinking very clearly either at that point, because I should have gone, but I didn't. I did have them take me home, and as we were going home, I called my cardiologist and my neurologist and asked them to take a look at me, and everybody did, and they all said the same thing, "You're lucky to be alive, and that's just the way it is." So at that point, we got home, and for about a week, I was very foggy. It was like I could look directly at you, and I could tell that I knew who you were, and maybe even knew what you did, but I could not remember your name. And there were a lot of things like that, where I would look at something, or I would try to remember a disease, and I would know everything about those things, but the name was gone. It was stuck someplace in a drawer in my brain, and I just didn't have access to it. After a week, all of that went away, and I was kind of really struggling with, okay, there seems like an awful lot that happened to somebody, and what the hell did that mean? So I had to go back to work, and life went on. But within a week of that, I started having this incredible desire to hear classical piano music, which was a big departure for me because I was a kid of the 60s. It was rock and roll, and there really wasn't much of anything else. When I was 7 years old, my mom had made me take piano lessons for a year, which I dutifully did under threat of terrible things happening to me. And I did it for a year and never wanted to go back. So this was very foreign for me. And it didn't stop though. It just kept getting this constant barrage of wanting to hear classical piano music, but we didn't have any. So one day I said, I gotta go get some classical piano music on a CD. And at the time, we lived way out in the country, so I had to drive to Albany, New York, which was about an hour away, to find a place that had classical piano CDs. And I did that, and when I walked into the store, it's like a CD case literally jumped off the shelf into my hands. And it was Vladimir Ashkenazy playing his favorite Chopin. And I was so amazed by the music. I listened to it on the way home. I listened to it every day. I made my family listen to it. I made the people that I work with, made them listen to it while I was doing surgery. And I'm sure that everybody thought that I was a little left of center as a result of this whole thing. But at that point, I was literally smitten with the music and realized that, oh my God, it's not going to be enough for me to listen to this. I need to learn how to play it. And so I didn't have a piano, and I didn't remember anything about how to play, but magically thinking that was, well, that won't really matter. I'll just somehow muddle through this. But what was interesting was the next day, one of our babysitters came by and said, I have to move, and I had this old upright piano that I love, but I need to store it for a year. Could I leave it at your house? And we said sure, and suddenly I have a piano, and I went and bought some books on how to teach myself, and I also bought all the sheet music from the CD, which was, kind of a ludicrous thought because I didn't know how to play, and I didn't have the faintest idea how to tackle anything of that complexity. But again, undaunted, I started going through the book trying to teach myself. And about 3 to 4 weeks after the lightning event, I have a dream. And it was strange because this was a very vivid dream. And in this dream, I'm walking out onto a stage, and I realized that myself, am actually playing at a concert hall. But I'm walking in my spiritual form. I'm walking up behind myself, and I'm listening to the music that I'm playing, and I'm in this big concert hall. I remember I actually drew a picture of the concert hall. It was that vivid. And I walked up behind myself. I just stood there, and I was playing this music, and the ending had a loud crashing ending, and it woke me up, out of a sound sleep. And as I was sitting there in the bed, I got up and looked at the clock, and it was 3:15, and I thought, what the hell? And I walked out to the piano, and I tried to plunk out some of the notes that I'd heard, but I didn't have the faintest idea at that point how to do anything in terms of writing or notation. So I said, the hell with this, and I went back to bed because I had a busy day the next day. So I got up in the morning, and one of the first things that I realized was that every time I sat down at that piano, the music from the dream would start playing in my head, and it was like a permanent partner that I had of this music that was just always there, and the minute it had an opportunity to start playing, it would. The music was always the same, and it was very haunting. It reminded me of a little 2-year-old child that was very insistent and play with me, Daddy, play with me, and the music was like that. If I was busy and couldn't do it, it got more insistent. It was really kind of strange, but if I didn't play it and didn't give some attention to it every day, it would interfere with my thoughts at work and interfere with everything else that I was doing. So I started trying to learn how to play, and one of the big turning points was was struggling to learn a piece of music called the Fantasy Impromptu, one of the Chopin favorites. And I was sitting at the piano trying to teach myself this piece of music, and which is hard to learn either with a teacher. The teaching yourself was next to impossible. And one day my daughter's best friend was over at the house, and her mom is an accomplished classical violinist. And she came over to pick her up. Her name is Jackie. Jackie was the child. Her mom was Penny. And Penny came in, and she says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "I'm trying to learn this piece of music." I said, "But I'm really struggling because the hands don't line up." And she said, "Well, they're not supposed to." And I said, "What do you mean? Why would somebody write a piece of music where the hands don't line up?" And she said, "It's what's called a polyrhythm." And I said, "I don't understand. What's a polyrhythm?" And she said, "I'm not even gonna attempt to tell you this." She said, "You need to get a teacher." So she recommended Sandy McCain, who was the chairman of music at Hartwood College, and we lived in Oneonta, which was just down the street from Hartwood College. And I called Sandy up and asked her if she would take on an old guy who wanted to learn how to play, and she let me come for an audition, and I went to her studio, and she told me to bring some pieces of music that I had been working on, which I did. And after I was finished, she said that she would take me on, but under no circumstances was I allowed to play any of this music again until she said I could. The thought being that I did not have any of the foundation needed to be able to play those pieces of music. Anything that I did to injure that process would just take much, much longer to reach. So I followed her advice, and I didn't. But I had told her about the music that was playing in my head, and as we went along, we were working 2 hours a week, and our only time in common was 5 in the morning, and so we would meet from 5 to 6, 2 days a week, and that was kind of our time to do this. And as time went on, I would work on trying to write down little snippets of that music from the dream, and as I was learning to play, and I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I mean, but I would write down, a measure or two, and I would throw it in a drawer, and I had this big collection of little pieces of paper that had different thoughts from the music. But the music in my head was always exactly the same, and it was just constantly playing. So the Lightning was 1994. I started taking lessons in 1998 after a few years of trying to muddle through it myself unsuccessfully. And in 2002, I started going to a piano camp for adults called the Sonata. It's a piano camp for adults in Bennington, Vermont. And it's a group of people that meet at an old convent, and there's a piano in every room, and there's usually about 30 people who are at these sessions. And so in May of 2002, I started, and each May I would go at the same time. And in 2006, something happened. And what happened was, in that intervening years of trying to understand what had happened to me, I had started seeing a psychic medium, Linda Dickinson, and I was intent on trying to understand what happened to me and why it happened. And I went to see her in January or February of 2006. And I sat down in the chair across from her, and she jumped up and said, "Tell me you're going to piano camp." And I was like, "Geez, I was undecided." I said, "It's really busy right now, and I didn't know if I could afford to go." And she said, "No, you have to go. It's very important. You're going to meet a woman there, and she's going to have a huge influence on your life." And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know what the hell this means, but so I made plans to go. And when I went in 2006, there was something new there. And the owner, Polly Vanderwind, her sister, Erica Vanderwind Feidner, was the #1 salesperson at Steinway, New York. And she had left Steinway, and she had transitioned to Bosendorf pianos, and she was there at this meeting, and she had flown in 5 or 6 beautiful Bosendorfer pianos for people to play on at music camp, and which was pretty neat. But she and I got talking about the Lightning and how I came to play and what it all meant. And she said, there's only one person that could tell the story, and that's Oliver Sacks. And I thought, okay. The only thing I knew about Oliver Sacks was that he had written the book Awakenings, and he was responsible for solving the riddle of Parkinson's disease. But I didn't know anything more about him. And yeah, I thought, okay, life goes on. And at that point, I went back home and went back to life as usual. But as soon as I got home, I think it was about June sometime, I get a phone call from Oliver Sacks. And I thought, oh, what's this all about? And Oliver says, I've heard about the story with you and the Lightning and the music, and I would like you to come to New York and be one of my patients, because I've got a collection of people who've had interesting events happen in their lives, and I think you would fit into that group. And I thought, sure, I'd love to meet you and go through that. So in August of 2006, I drive down to New York City. I meet Oliver Sacks in the morning, and we spent the entire day talking about the life and the Lightning and anything else that came along. And at the end of the day, we're standing in his doorway saying goodnight, and he looked at me with his piercing eyes to just look right through you. And he says, the music went through an awful lot of trouble to get here from the lightning strike. The least you can do is write it. And I was so taken with that. And when I got home, I had promised myself I would start right away to write the music. But I didn't know how to write music, so I bought a program called Sibelius, which is like writing music for dummies. And by using the fact that I had the music from the dream was constantly playing in my head, I could write something on the electric piano and had it play it back to me. And if it matched what I was hearing, I knew I was on the right track. So I spent 7 months every single night for that whole time, and my objective was to be able to play the music from my piano group when I went in May of 2007. So I finished writing the music out for somebody else to read, and by that point I was able to play it as well. And that was my goal, was to play it for the group in May of 2007, which I did, and it was well received. And while I was at that meeting, I got a call from Oliver, and I hadn't heard from him since August. And he said, you know, I was wondering if I could use your story in my musical Philia that's going to be coming out. And I thought, sure, why not? I don't have anything to hide. And he said, good, because you're chapter one, and chapter one is going to appear in the New Yorker magazine July 23rd, a few months from now. I thought, geez, you got to be kidding me. And he said, no. And I said, okay. Well, so suddenly a story that I had kept to myself to a large extent had been taken out of the closet. And at this point, you know, I'm just feeling my way along. So the article comes out in the New Yorker, and the phone starts ringing. And one of the first people to call me was a friend of mine, Carlton Clay, who was the head of music at the State University College in Oneonta, New York, in the Department of Music he was the head of. And Carl says, hey, you know, I'd like you to teach a class and come in and talk to us about this whole lightning thing and the music. And I said, okay, sure, why not? So we were making plans to do that. And then next week he calls and he says, you know, it's getting an awful lot of information asking that's going on around this whole episode. And so would you also play the music for a class? And I thought, sure, can't be too hard. So, you know, and now I've committed myself and just going along doing my regular activities of piano lessons and work. And a few weeks later he calls and he says, geez, you know, I don't know how to approach this, he says, but we're getting inundated with phone calls and people wanting to know more about this. And he said, would you consider playing a concert at the Performing Arts Center? And I said, geez, you know, my initial response is no way. And he goes, and he just wouldn't stop. And I said, but I don't know how to do this. I said, I don't know anything about performing. I don't know anything about being able to be prepared for something like that. And he goes, oh, you'll be fine. And he was lying, and I should have trusted my intuition. But I went along with it, and I said that I would do it. And so you know, now he's turned the heat up on the boiler a little bit, and then I'm starting to really struggle and panic. And he calls back another couple weeks later and says, geez, he said, you're not going to believe this. He said, there's going to be 3 television crews there. The BBC One, Granada Media, and German Television. I'm like, oh, please. I said, you can't do this to me. And he goes, oh, you'll be fine. And at that point, I was absolutely panicked. I called my piano teacher, Sandy, and I said, I don't know how in the world I'm going to do this. And I said, is there something you can do to teach me how to do this and get me through it? And she said, yeah, but it's going to be a lot of work for both of us. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it if you'll do it. So at that point, we started working 3 hours minimum a day on doing this. And we started out by just going to the Performing Arts Center and teaching me how to walk up on the stage and not embarrass myself, and how to approach the whole thing of doing a performance. And then she would go up and, you know, she would make me play, and she would go up in the bleachers and she'd say, I can't hear you. I'm like, oh my God. And so it was a difficult process. And so the you know, this whole thing took months of preparation, and in January of 2008 was when this concert was, actually 2 nights, and it was a packed house. I mean, standing room only. Somehow I managed to get through it, and I remember going to the green room right beforehand, and I said to God and my guides and angels, and I said, look, you guys got me here, and I said, please don't abandon me and make me do this by myself, because I'm going to embarrass us both. And thankfully they stuck with me, and we were able to just get through the whole process. And at that point, the music took on a life of its own because I started getting invited to play all over the country. The music from the dream, what I affectionately called the Lightning Sonata, continued to play in my head and continued to be developed, technically as well. And I continued doing that work. I had an incredible opportunity to perform it at Mozart's home in Austria. There's a basement concert hall under his house. I got to perform it there, which was an incredible event for me to be in the house of a great master like that and to walk the same stairs, which was really something. And then one of the performances that I did was for the International Association of Near Death Studies, an organization that's large and is essentially people who have a great interest in near-death studies or who have had an experience. This is their conference. And I was a keynote speaker in 2013, I think it was. And I did a talk about this whole aspect of things. And then they had a piano brought in, and I played the lightning piece for the crowd. What was interesting about it was that right after I finished playing, somebody came from the audience and said, "You've got to see this." And I said, "Okay." She pulled out her camera, and it's a digital camera, and she's looking at the screen. And when I was up on the stage giving my talk, she took a picture. And there was a big blue orb about 10 feet over my head. And I thought, okay, what the hell was that? And obviously some form of energy. And when I was playing at the piano, she had taken another picture. And the blue orb had come down and was sitting right at the very bottom end of the keyboard on the left side. But what was interesting to me was that the orb actually gave off a bluish light onto the keys. It's not like it was a reflection of something else. It was energy in and of itself. It was casting that energy onto the keys. So my interpretation of that was that, this is part of whoever gave me the music is sticking around to make sure that I'm true to it and I don't screw it up too badly, which I was forever grateful for. And so things have just continued on in this way, and I've continued to play the music. One of the things that has happened every time I play in a concert is that people will come up to me very sheepishly and they don't want other people to hear what they've got to say, and they'll come in and it's like, this has happened to me also. And they've had some sort of injury and they had a near-death experience, and they don't want people to know because people are going to think they're crazy. And certainly, when this happened to me in the 90s, it was not a time where you could go around telling people that. I kept it to myself because it was not unusual for somebody to call the state and say, "Hey, this guy's getting really loose around the edges. You probably ought to take his license away." So I just kind of kept it to myself. Of course, Oliver took that out of the closet and he put it out there for everybody to look at. So in the interim, there's still lots of music that I have continued to receive from wherever this music comes from. And I've often thought that I tune into a frequency and the music exists on that frequency, and I have access to it. And lots of other composers have said things like that. Even Mozart said the music comes in final form, it's just given to him, and he would write it down. And lots of other pianists and musicians say very similar things, that the music comes from someplace. So I don't know where that place is, but certainly it may have a location. And of course the other question then becomes, is it possible that it's buried in DNA of me, and that however many times of lifetimes that I have had, the DNA has a record of all of that stuff? Or it could also possibly exist in what's called the Akashic Records, which is where everything that has ever happened is stored, and somehow I have found a way to access that information, at least in a musical sense. And in my discussions with Oliver Sacks, Oliver thought that the lightning had somehow rewired my brain so that I had access to things now that I never would have had access to. I think it goes more than that. I think that there is encoded in our DNA things that we have no idea exist. Consciousness does not die. Our consciousness continues on and is with us from the beginning of our spiritual life and will be with us until the end of it. And however many lives we live, it's always there. You're always the same person. Unfortunately, you don't get to remember them, and I'm sure that there's reasons for the way it's set up that way, but it's a very difficult thing to comprehend.